I got to Nashville in December of 2021. And we were going full bore by spring of 2022. And I recall in the summer of 2022, Dan Mandis, Brian Wilson, myself, we're talking about how excited we were about the red wave that was sure to come in November of that year. And I recall looking at the polling data, and I recall looking at the numbers, crunching the numbers, and feeling like we're picking up 30 or 35 seats in the House of Representatives. Well, we did win a majority in the House of Representatives, but it was razor thin. We also expected to pick up 4 or 5 seats in the Senate. That never materialized. A Senate majority never materialized. And there's a lot of analysis and expert opinion as to why that was, but the primary reason, in my opinion, is that Donald Trump was not on the ballot. And as much as Donald Trump attempted to help those that were, there was still a tremendous sense that something had been taken from us in 2020. And I'm not here to necessarily relitigate 2020, although I welcome those conversations. I'll talk about anything you want to talk about, as a matter of fact. But I do believe that a lot of people, because Trump was not on the ballot, felt like they could stay home. Across the country, not necessarily in the state of Tennessee. We did pretty well in the state of Tennessee, picking up a Republican seat, as a matter of fact, because of redistricting. Andy Ogles eventually winning District 5 that was seated with a Cooper in it. Jim or John, I always get them confused. Was it Jim? It's Jim.
Yeah, Jim.
John was the mayor?
John was the mayor.
Okay, good. I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that, because I would transpose them all the time. Anyway, so there are many different theories as to why the red wave in 2022 did not materialize. But the fact of the matter is, regardless of why it happened, it happened. And it created a dynamic by which we've lived in very perilous times over the last 2 years. A razor-thin majority in the House means that any 3 or 4 Republicans who veer off the reservation create a dynamic by which you can't get anything done over there. And it really doesn't matter, because you send it over to the Senate and Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote. You're not going to get anything sensible done over there. And you got a Democrat in the White House. So we thought in 2022 that we would see a lot of Americans rising up, going to the polls, and beginning the process of taking their country back. And in some ways, they did that. But this is the real deal. This is the time. I was telling someone earlier, well, it was a former partner of mine, Andrea Lindenberg. I was talking with her on the phone before I came on air today. And we were discussing politics, and she's back in television news. She did talk radio for about 5 years, and she's now back in television news, and she was lamenting the fact, I think I can tell this story. She was lamenting the fact that she can't really talk politics because she is a conservative, and she is surrounded in her newsroom by a bunch of liberals, and she said they're all glum. They've all got their heads down and their lips pooched out. And I said, why is that? And she said, I think they know what's coming. I think they know what's coming. But I don't talk politics around there, so we're talking politics. And I recall the reaction after 2020 and the frustration and the consternation that people had. And I related to her. I was like, for the almost 25 years that I've been doing this, longer than some, not as long as others, every presidential election, we always say the same thing. I bet you can guess what we say. Every time there's a presidential election, what do we say? The most important election of our lifetime. Don't we? Don't we have a tendency of doing that? Everyone. When I was 7 years old in 1980, I remember hearing that the election between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, and I don't know why I remember this, but John Anderson was the libertarian. I think it was John Anderson, because I think it was like the singer swinging. Not that John Anderson, a different one. But I believe he was the libertarian candidate that year. That was the most important election of our lifetime. 84, very important. We're on the right track. Let's keep going. Landslide. 88, let's keep the momentum. We wish Reagan could run again. But, George H.W. Bush, a reasonable, maybe a poor, but a reasonable facsimile, turned out he wasn't. 92, most important election of our lifetime. First election I ever voted in. And the last time that I voted for a Democrat, I voted for Bill Clinton in 1992. I did not make that mistake in 1996. Although, you know, it doesn't shame me to say this. It's just the truth. You know what I did in 1996? I didn't vote. Because I knew that the Democrats weren't my cup of tea. I knew that I couldn't support their big government, big spending policies. But Bob Dole, come on, guys. And then on and on. I won't go through each one of them, but each one of them were told this, and I recall it in 2016 and I recall it in 2020. So what am I supposed to say now? Bless you. There might be one more coming. Pardon me, I had to sneeze. Thank you, Bill. It reminds me of the boy who cried wolf. Y'all remember the story, right? The boy who cried wolf. There's a wolf, he's playing around, everybody comes running, there's no wolf. Eventually, there's a wolf. And eventually nobody comes anymore because there have been so many false alarms. What we don't want to do is to overinflate the importance of this election. But at the same time, I truly believe that it is an inflection point in the United States of America. When we talk about making America great again, when Donald Trump speaks of this at Madison Square Garden before an absolutely packed house, what a dramatic and impactful moment that was in American history. And meantime, all the liberals are screaming about Nazis and Adolf Hitler or whatever. It's just nonsense. It's baloney. Absolute nonsense. But it's not about necessarily Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. It's not necessarily about the individuals that are in play here. And it's not necessarily about you or me. But it is very much about if and when, America will lose its way as so many nations and so many standards of democracy have done in the past. When will we lose our way in terms of our belief that above all else, that man has rights? And those rights are given to us by a God or a higher being or a power greater than ourselves. Not by a government, but by a higher force than thee. And that no government, nor any other man, has the ability to supersede those God-given rights that we have been granted. Our founding fathers understood that in order to create a great country, we had to create a country that recognized powers beyond itself. We had to create a country that recognized that the rights of the individual supersede the power of the governing body, so long as no others are being deprived of their rights and their liberties. This is not to say that we have ever been perfect. This is not to say that we have ever truly lived up to that dynamic principle. But throughout the course of American history, we have at very least strived for it. Obviously, there have been bumps along the way. There have been huge chasms along the way in the form of slavery, which was common worldwide during the time that the United States of America practiced it. Something that we obviously recognize as evil in our modern times. It's always been about forming not a perfect union, but what? A more perfect union focused on the individual liberties of you and of me and of Ken and of Bell, every single one of us. And if we maintain that focus, we maintain a focus that furthers the American experiment. When we begin believing that the good of the many outweighs the liberties of the few, it's a great slogan, and liberals love to use it, and it sounds great. Everyone loves that scene in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, where Leonard Nimoy, Spock, sacrifices himself, and Captain Kirk says, why? Why did you do it? And he said, the good of the many outweighs the good of the needs of the one, or the few. Well, that's all about personal sacrifice. That's a completely different thing. But when you apply that, when you overlay that in the public dynamic, what you end up with denying individuals their individual liberties and rights because the mob demands it. And that's what Kamala Harris is all about. I'm not trying to get too philosophical when I talk about this subject. But I do believe that we have a fork in the road. That we are either going to allow the natural way of things to continue, the natural flow of how all of this goes flows toward socialism. It flows toward centralized government. It flows toward government takeover of individual businesses and business practices. It flows toward government limiting your rights based on what they consider their responsibility to protect the will of the many and not the liberties of the few. That's what this election is about. We can boil it down to individual issues and individual ideologies and individual cases till the cows come home. The fork in the road is about whether or not you want to continue to see a more centralized form of government that eventually will lead to socialism, which always leads to totalitarianism. Or do you value liberty? If you vote for Kamala Harris, you're either voting for socialism or you don't know that you're voting for socialism. If you vote for Donald Trump, I believe you're voting for liberty and a continuation of the American experiment. That's where we are.